Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Grindle. I'm the Executive Director here at USITT, and we are pleased to continue the conversation centered around the No More 10 out of 12 movement. And through our conversation series, we've been talking about the impact of the 10 out of 12 and various practices on different aspects of the entertainment community. Today, our panel is being led by Rachel Spencer-Hewitt. Rachel has assembled a wonderful panel of caregivers as we talk about how this practice impacts those who have to care for others in their life while working in our industry. So thank you much to our panelists, and I'll step away and hand it off to Rachel.
Thank you so much, David. And it is such a pleasure to be back on this USIT web series and to be engaging with what it means to support humane scheduling. I am Rachel Spencer-Hewitt, Programming Director of Parent Artist Advocacy League for the Performing Arts. And we're partnering with No More 10 out of 12s.com if you want to look it up if you're new to this conversation. And we're here to engage in conversation, as David said, with what humane scheduling looks like when you have caregiving responsibilities, why that's important, what that impacts. For those of you listening, this is not a conversation to establish whether or not caregiver support should be considered. This is a conversation that assumes that as a right, caregiver needs are access needs. And so we're going to be talking about scheduling specifically. My ring light went out. So that's my cue to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. And I'm just going to throw the ball to Tamanya. If you could please say your name and your pronouns and your discipline.
Yes, hi, my name is Tamanya Garza, she, her. I am a director and a producer, and I am also the PAL Director of Community and Justice Initiatives, as well as the Chief Representative for Philadelphia. And should I just popcorn to somebody else?
Yeah, throw the ball.
I will throw it over to Amanda.
Hi, friends. My name is Amanda Spooner, she, her, hers. I'm joining from the native lands of Cayuga Nation, the Haudenosaunee, and the Susquehannock, and I am a stage manager. I'm an equity counselor, and I'm also a professor of stage management at Ithaca College. And I work with PAL as an institutional ambassador, and also just spreading the word as a parent and a caregiver myself. And I'm going to pass it to Christy. Hi, Christy. Oh no, is Christy frozen? Oh.
Oh, she's back. She's back. Kate, awesome. We're passing it to Kate. And for those of you, if you didn't catch that, Christy is a costume designer and mother, and was PAL's first ambassador to a USIT conference, actually, and has been advocating in that way for others. Kate Kerrigan, take it away.
Hi, I'm Kate Kerrigan. I am a playwright and a librettist and a lyricist, and I am also a mom with a 5-month-old. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this. I'll pop on to other Kate.
Hey everyone, I'm Catherine Nelson, or I do go by Kate as well. I use either they or she pronouns. And I'm, I think, the one person here who's not a caregiver personally, but I've been really fortunate to work closely with a lot of them. I'm based in the Detroit area, and I'm a stage manager, a costume designer, and an equity counselor. And in non-COVID times, I'm the resident production stage manager at Detroit Public Theater. Let's see, I will popcorn it. I think we're Garlia. You haven't gone yet.
Hello, everybody. And also so great to put a face to the name Catherine, because in my working with the Detroit Public Theater, I was like, why is that name so familiar? And so when you're saying, I was like, yes, a DPT. I love them. And so I didn't hear the first question, but
it's just intro, your name, pronoun, what you do.
So my name is Hogarlia Cornelia Jones. My pronouns are she, her, and I wear a number of hats. I run Blackboard plays. I'm also one of the founding producers of Harlem 9, the producing director of PAL, and I also wear a bigger. And also I am a line producer at the public theater. So very, small organizations growing to big ones as well.
Love it all across the board. And just to support you there, we're going to popcorn it to Kaya.
Hi, Carlia, good to see you. Hi, my name is Kaya Dunn. I am an actor and a director. I'm also the head of acting at UNC Charlotte and an intimacy coordinator. So like many caregivers, lots of hats. And I'm the parent of 3 boys who are all virtual schooling. So I have a new 11-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 4-year-old.
Amazing. Welcome. As you can see, this is an extraordinary panel of human beings, of artists, and of caregivers and caregiver supporters. And now we want to get to know all of you. If you're watching and you're watching on StreamYard, you can use the comment section to contribute to the conversation. We love an active chat. If you're watching on other platforms and there's an active chat, feel free to comment there because we'll be highlighting some of your feedback. We want to make sure that we hear from you. I even got a Facebook private message with a question about this conversation. So I know that so many folks have kind of a personal reaction to this. I just want to welcome everyone from North Carolina contributing. And I'm going to start with the first question with Tamanya. Tamanya, we were on a panel recently and I just appreciated how you shared the story of like your life before becoming a parent and caregiver, working as a director, and then the moment becoming pregnant and understanding, oh, now I have to consider caregiving in the context of this industry and what it expects of me. Can you share how the schedule of our field it impacted your reaction and what that reaction was?
Absolutely. And I think, as everyone said, I am also a parent. I don't share my little one's name online, so they go by Spider Gwen. So if Spider Gwen needs to swing in and rescue us from any danger, just be warned. And to answer your question, Rachel, I was a producer and director in Philadelphia for a number of years, for almost 15 years. And I realized when I got pregnant, I didn't know who the other parents were because we keep ourselves very secret in this community. And that made me think that that's what I had to do. And looking at the schedules that I had been a part of, including 10 out of 12s, including rehearsals late into the night or all day long, I realized that I was going to have to give up directing and producing probably for 2 to 5 years. I planned to nurse. I planned to be home for a bit with my little one. And I just realized it wasn't going to be compatible with the current state of theater and directing. I also realized there was no community for me because we were all so scared and keeping ourselves so secret in many ways. And not to speak for every parent in the community, but many of us, that I had no support system that was speaking right out loud. And it was so incredible not long after I had my little one to meet up with PAL and to realize that a different world could exist.
Absolutely. We talk about having to weigh those choices like, oh, I want to nurse, but if I have a tech schedule, and it's not compatible, instantly we start going through the sacrifices in our head. It never occurs to us that, oh, maybe there's support that can exist for me inside the structure. And that's part of what we want to talk about today. I want to say thank you to Laura and Lynn for being here on behalf of Ways to Support Their Friends, including caregivers of parents. This is absolutely a conversation for elder care. So thank you for bringing that up, Laura. We will be engaging with that. We were just talking with Tamanya about, that realization when you become a caregiver of, what may have to be sacrificed. Kaya, as a mother in academia who also directs and who also performs, how much of your schedule is your own? How much of it is dictated by the institution? And what does that mean as a mother of 3 boys in terms of your agency and what that impact is?
Yeah, I was lucky because, and we've talked about this before, but my first real professional company affiliation was with Moxie Theater. So I got to see women nursing and painting at 2 a.m. with babies before I entered my own parenthood journey. So for me, it was something that I saw, and I saw it with a Black woman leading it who just did it because she was like, I'm going to nurse and you need me at the theater. So I feel like I was blessed to have that as an example. And then with my oldest, we kind of didn't ask permission. We just brought him. It was easier with one baby. Once I had more children, like that's when I transitioned actually to doing academia, because it was hard to, it affects more the jobs that I take because it becomes part of the negotiation process. And so one of the things I think people don't really think about is that there are fantastic parent caregivers, and both parents have responsibility, but often this falls on the female parent. It falls on mothers quite often, like we're seeing in the pandemic. And especially mothers of color, sometimes we don't have the same support systems. My mother still works. Like there was no grandparent to take care of my children. And so I think, conversations about how we're arranging schedules, there have been a lot of jobs that I've had to turn down because I can't, like, it hasn't been a consideration. And it's sort of like, well, I watched a lot of people be told, don't have kids if you're serious about this. When I was trained, that was one of the things we were told, like, if you love anything else, don't do theater. But I became such a better practitioner once I had my children. And also it's helped me move in a lot of different spaces as far as like accommodations for disabilities, thinking about how things work in other systems, networking with other parents. Like the best people I've gotten have partially been through parent connections. And so one of the things I really want the field to think about is often people don't act until something affects them. So like my kid's 11, I've been doing this a long time, right? And so thinking about like, what do those accommodations mean? But yeah, it means that there's a lot of jobs I can't take, or I could take if there could be a couple of considerations.
100%. 100%. And I also appreciate you talking about, as you have more children and as those responsibilities compound, because we also have the conversation often with, that's money I think we brought up last time, what happens when you have children and you have elder care? It's this idea of you found permission because you saw it exemplified in the theater. And so for those of you listening, what I want to highlight is not that we're saying, is it possible? We're saying we've seen it be possible. And there's a devastating impact when it's not present. I want to shout out to Jill, who had brought kids to the job in the 90s when it was not as common. We're so happy that you're here. And Donald, yes, so this idea of when caregiving responsibility, as Kaya said, falls on women primarily, what then also happens is that those who identify as male or those who are expected to compensate professionally miss out on caregiving. And so it's very much a gender inclusive conversation, although gender discrimination is part of the realities. And welcome Katya, who has also entered academia for the same reasons. This is so beautiful. I'm going to take this example of Moxie Theater Company that Kaya mentioned. Check them out in San Diego. Delicia was the artistic director at the time and is legendary, folks, for creating caregiver support. And Amanda, you yourself have done shows without the 10 out of 12. You yourself have done shows with the 5-day rehearsal week. And I know that this is about creating a humane environment, but there's so much fear wrapped around this. It's like, oh, I'm so glad that, Tamanya and Kaya have found support, but then what does that mean for the show? Like what happens to the show when that support is created? So how do you see that, impacting you personally as a parent and a stage manager, and what happens to the show?
Yeah, I mean, I have stuff to share, so that's okay.
I can't hear you.
Oh,
but
no.
You are unmuted and amazing.
Oh, no. Can you hear me now?
Nope.
Come back to me.
You can hear her? Okay, great. Keep going then. Keep going.
Okay. I'm going to share. I mean, I have a lot to share, so I tried to be concise with my notes that I created for this moment. But I will say that as a stage manager, I have done shows without 10 out of 12s. I did a show called 10 out of 12, written by Anne Washburn, that had no 10 out of 12 rehearsals when we did it. And Rachel Spencer Hewitt loves that fun fact, and I hope she heard it because it's just true, right? And we made great art together. I've done shows that use the 5-day rehearsal week, and you know what? We made great theater. Those are two methods that result in a huge shift toward a more humane environment for crew, designers, and stage managers. Period. Full stop. And they're monumental changes for caregivers and parents. And even if you're not a caregiver, that should matter to you, because we should matter to each other. And honestly, as a stage manager, I get nervous saying it because I'm so used to having to be sort of in the middle between two extreme opinions in a debate or conflict. But the truth is that often stage managers, crew members, and designers' needs are not given primacy in the rooms we share. We center the time that we have actors with us in theater, in the way we schedule our time. We work around that schedule, the time when we have the cast with us, to be sure that all the necessary work that goes into preparing that moment is done. And that's not the fault of actors. By the nature of the product we ultimately share with audiences, we commit to centering and sometimes infantilizing actors and sometimes directors. But the labor we do is not limited to what happens on stage during showtime. The working hours often seem limitless around rehearsal time with the cast, and we should stop pretending that our labor is limited to what the audience sees when it comes to our humanity and our livelihoods. I think for stage managers, we have created a culture in which freelancing stage managers cannot speak their truth as caregivers. I don't feel like I can. PAL has given me a lot of space to do that, and I'm so grateful for it. We've created a working culture in which stage managers often assume they can't raise children, and eliminating 10 out of 12s and leaning into the 5-day work week has to come from the top. We're expecting stage managers and especially caregivers to just deal with it, with the inhumane working hours and expectations, or simply not participate, but really institutions should be dealing with it, right? They're the ones who have to do the work. And we're destroying artists by overworking them, by overworking us. And I was thinking about this morning in the shower, just to share with all you. Because that's where my best thoughts happen for sure, especially as a parent. I know a lot of people can understand that here today. But I think that for the community, it's hard to buy into eliminating 10 out of 12s and widely adopting the 5-day work week, because everything we do in theater is fleeting. Even Phantom of the Opera is fleeting. It's in a finite container of time. It's not going to be there forever, I don't think. I mean, I hope it runs as long as it can for the jobs, but it's all finite and it's all fleeting. And I think that's why we have a hard time trying structural change in our common practice for stage managers, crew, designer, for everyone, because everything seems so intensely of the moment, and it doesn't feel like we have room to experiment. But what we do is labor, whether it's pre-show or post-show or preparing for rehearsal time together with the cast and the director in the room. And what we do is meant to be collaborative, and we cannot be collaborative if we're not listening to each other. So I think that, when it comes to being a caregiver or a parent who's a stage manager or a crew or a designer, we have set ourselves up in a working culture where there's not enough space to speak your truth or to ask for what you need, because you're not given primacy in the process. And it's hard to dismantle working culture. It's hard to dismantle those habits. A friend of mine reminded me yesterday, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than actually having collective change. But that's why we have to look to institutions to deal with it. They've got to deal with it because they're destroying the very people that make it happen. So that's everything I had to share today, because I have to leave early.
Yeah. Thank you. You will see Amanda step away a little bit early, but the way that we run things here is you come and go in a way that's supportive. And I think that pretty much kept us moving forward in the conversation. Because, I mean, a takeaway that's going to be really important before I throw the ball to Christy here is this idea of when we don't listen to each other and folks prioritize the show, the product, right? What that does is that makes the people dispensable. And when the people are dispensable, we function from a place of fear of being replaceable. When we function from a place of fear, we're not going to talk about our needs. We're not going to talk about our caregiving responsibilities. But then I also believe that we're not going to experiment, as you said. And so what is actually suffering is the art. There's no experimentation there. There's no collaboration. There's no trust. And like, what a sad cycle for us to adopt just because we're too scared to change a tax schedule. And that's for everybody. Christy, I would love to throw the ball to you because as a designer, you know, Tech Week is where so many of those pieces come together. Your costumes go under the lights. You are a parent. How do you see either, you know, the impact of 10 out of 12s, how they've been so far, or what it would mean for you if they changed? So something closer to 8 out of 10s or something more supportive.
Yeah. I'm going to try turning off my camera because I'm not on Wi-Fi. That might help.
Solid. I can hear you. You sound great.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, the 10 out of 12s, unlike Tamanya, did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Like Tamanya, I started in grad school when my kids were like 1st grade through 4th grade. And so it became this kind of working culture that we had. I was fortunate that my husband was able to, you know, be dad and mom and take them all places and do all the things. But there were times when I had outside projects and I had to go to school and I had to go to tech, and it was really, really challenging. I'm really interested in seeing how an 8 out of 10 would work. I'm really interested in seeing how a 40-hour work week would work, and being a part of that because, like Amanda said, you know, our needs aren't always a priority, and I think that that's a part of the conversation and seeing all the work that goes behind creating an outfit, designing an outfit, shopping an outfit, needing to see it, needing to make adjustments, all of those things. It's a lot of work. And I feel like a lot of times people, especially in costumes, just kind of assume that, oh, it'll get done, or I need this, and it doesn't matter that it's a 8-hour adjustment, but we need it to be done. And so you do have those times where you stay up all night and make things happen for the show. But there is, I don't know, it candidly, I would say there is this passion behind all that I do, and I want it to be the right thing, and I want it to be the most beautiful thing. But then I have to constantly check myself to make sure that I'm not killing myself in a sense. You know, as a designer, I feel like not having a 10 out of 12, having an 8 out of 10, it would give us more time to relax, more time to prepare. It would kind of force not just costume or light or sound or projections. It would force us to having more time, like more planning beforehand, and instead of seeing something on stage and then saying, oh no, we've got to change it. And that's really important for us all, from the director down to stagehand, to be able to understand how to see something before actually seeing it, and be able to give everyone what they need in order to see it. And I've been fortunate to work with directors who are able to do that, and the process happens so much more quickly and so much more smoothly. Yeah, it's just not having a 10 out of 12, getting back to this humane, having this humane conversation about what it means to be a designer, an artist, an actor, a director, or anything. You know, we need our rest. We just had May Day. May 1st was the International Workers' Day. And, you know, I saw one graphic that said 8 hours for work, 8 hours for sleep, and 8 hours to do with what you will. Like, let us have that 8-hour time to do with what we will. And if that's taking your kids out, or having them come see what the process is, or having someone give like
I don't know if we lost your audio, but I'm totally on board with you, and so is Jill, who's commenting on YouTube saying that she hears you. We're gonna jump and grab you as soon as we can to finish that thought. But I also want to offer something in the chat to support what Christy is saying. That said, it would be great if directors could let go of the expectation that costume notes or alterations given at the end of the day will happen in time for the next day's rehearsal to begin. Kaya, you and I have talked about, maybe we'll visit this in a second, but this idea where when you work for the corporate world, you track all your hours, and then you go to the nonprofit world and they're like, we're going to book all your hours, and then we're going to have you invent some hours when that work gets done for free. And then you're going to show up with the work done in this magical land of invented hours. In terms of having that time to prepare and change things, I'm going to talk to Kate, because one of the big arguments I hear all the time is, okay, that's fine for new plays, but you can't do that with musicals. You can't do that with anything with a dance number. And Kate, as someone who works on musicals, Christy, we're so glad you're back. We're going to jump right back to you. Why are you so passionate about this as a mother, as a caregiver, and as an artist? Like, what would this do for musicals?
In some ways, I think I'm most passionate about it, not as a parent, but actually as an artist, because the 10 out of 12s are actually the easiest part of my personal job. I don't actually have to be there that much. That's crazy, because basically everything's been crammed into 1 week or 2 weeks, or if you're on Broadway, maybe it's 3 weeks, but an entire process that should have been happening for months, for years, maybe. I mean, I'll have been working on the show for 5 years, and the expectation is that a designer is going to walk in and pull some kind of rabbit out of their hat in the last couple weeks of a process, and it's absolutely bonkers to me. On an artistic level, the fact that there are very few conversations between me, the person who's been working on something for 5 years, and the costume designer. Like we might talk in passing, but because it's all crammed into this final sprint, everyone's working so hard and trying so desperately to get their job done that and they're such hard workers that there's no time for what Christy was talking about, that collaboration, that artistic space that you need to have in order to make something beautiful, that you need to be able to like figure those things out. And so I think an enormous problem in the process in terms of that, like top down, and I do a lot more commercial theater than I do not-for-profit theater, but I think it's true across the board, is that I think we need a lot more pre-production. Like, I think there should be a lot more time built in between creatives who are not connected to the acting process, and being able to have those conversations before the actors even walk into the room. I think that if we build those moments in, and honestly, if we build them in early enough, I don't even think they would take that much time. They're not that many hours, but we can't be asked to do those things for free. So it is asking for there to be more resources put towards designers and artists collaborating. And I think acknowledging what I'm using my phone, so everybody's name is so small. I think your name is Amanda. What Amanda was talking about with the way that we center actors, it does have to happen during certain portions of the process, but it actually doesn't need to happen all told all over the place. And I think we overdo it. I think we really, the words 10 out of 12 have nothing to do with the amount of time that Amanda or Christy are in theater working. 10 out of 12 is how many hours the actors are working. And so that means that they're not working, that Amanda is not there working 10 out of 12 hours. She is probably working 16 out of 18 hours. And that's a crazy number. That's completely unsustainable. And so I show up after a long day where actors have been censored and designers are now having they're finally getting time to work because the actors are no longer there, and they are working frantically in the like 2 hour break and another 2 hour break afterwards. Then we have notes sessions after that, so we're in hour 14 by the time I show up. A lot of times during tech, it's a, I think we're naming it incorrectly. We're calling it something that is a fallacy. And these are all people. Every person who's involved in these productions are such workhorses. We work so hard and we are so determined to make something beautiful. Like Christy was saying, that sense of like you have to stop yourself from doing the good work that you want to do so that you don't completely burn out. And that shouldn't have to happen. These are people who work really, really hard. And if they're saying it's impossible, and we're all saying this is an impossible situation, we have to start from scratch. And I think for me, it comes from developing pre-production. And that helps with choreography too. You shouldn't be doing choreography during tech. You shouldn't be staging during tech. There are things that are happening because everything is so compressed. Every part of the process is so compressed that nobody is able to get their job done in a reasonable amount of time. The only thing that's extended is the reading stage, which they will do, you'll do like 15 readings of a show because it's cheaper to do. But in the meantime, you're losing access to all of the things that designers can bring to the table, all of the things that the director and the choreographer can bring to the table. We don't make art in a vacuum. Scripts are not, it's like spending all your time writing the recipe as opposed to testing the recipe. And it's pretty weird to look at the recipe and be like, I think that you should probably stir instead of whisk. But let's not try it. We won't put it on its feet. We won't actually test it. We'll just rewrite it and say whisk instead of stir. And we think it will be better that way. And I feel like that's sort of the way that we're making theater right now because of the financial constraints that we're putting ourselves in and the way that we're envisioning that process.
I love that so much. Even Amanda typed into the private chat, beautifully put. And what I'm really hearing, it's like spending all the time writing the recipe. Yes, Erin commented. What I'm also hearing that's so powerful, right? Because we're like shorter hours and folks are like, I'm already struggling to get things done during tech. But what you're capturing is this idea that the concept is fewer hours for more time together. That's the exchange that we're making. We're not asking to do theater less. We're asking to do theater more and better, just not longer during that 1 week or during the week. And I also really love how you and Christy and Kaya were all emphasizing the fact, which I feel like happens to caregivers all the time. Now, listen, I will do the job. I will pour myself into it. Listen, I have killed myself for this before. Don't worry. I was literally concerned with my health finishing shows. No one's cutting corners here. And we feel like we have to self-advocate because right now in the conversation we do. But what's so exciting is that like, as y'all are shaping what it could look like and saying like, I still want to pour that energy in, what would it look like when passion is poured into boundaries? Right now, our passion is like splashing everywhere, all over the stage for 18 hours. But what happens when it's focused? Like what sort of power can go? But yes, Kaya, jump in, please.
I was just going to say, you can't have this conversation without talking about equity and about talking about whose culture this is modeled after, how we were all trained, right? Like I was trained under a white male model, white men who had no children. Like that was the model. And so often in these 10 out of 12s, exhausted people don't do great work, right? So I want to like echo Kate's, like we can do better work And I spend a lot of time studying Black women and like Black women's writings. I teach a course on Black female narratives. And the repeated theme is like, you cannot create without rest. And it has for so long been this driving force. It's like the Wall Street mentality that we just work people. And I think it is this like industrial complex. And there's this false notion that you can't make money, that if it's fun or enjoyable. I just went away with 4 Black women and we did work and we wrote and we also had like the greatest time and our work is better. We just wrote a chapter together on Black mother schooling. And it's like, I was so looking forward to those meetings. I mean, we met on December 20th. Like I hate writing and I don't like meetings, but we created spaces of joy. And this idea that joy and profit are 2 different things is really problematic. And I think parents, caregivers are specifically positioned to look at like, what does it mean to have love and joy? This thing that we all got into the art for, or most of us did not get into this because we wanted to be rich, right? Like we got into it because we love theater, we love storytelling. And it's also looking at like, whose stories are we excluding? Because now you have people who don't have children who are telling other people like, don't, and not that you can't tell stories of parents not having children, but if everybody is excluded because you're creating a toxic work environment, right? Like we're hearing these stories come out of producers who are abusive, but that's considered good work ethic. And so like what I keep hearing is this idea that like, who's controlling how we create these workspaces? So the works, because any parent ever will tell, I mean, every single mom or person on this call does the impossible, right? Like we're all doing all the things all the time and we're good at it. Like we are good at creative decision making. And I've said this before, like the first people to pivot in this pandemic, I did a show where I was in theater with Lauren Gunderson and Women's Theater Festival in North Carolina. And it was like, all of us had Thomas the Tank Engine on in the background in different languages, right? Like, and we did good theater in 3 days because we knew that when we were working and we all valued that work time so much more because we know what it is to like, I only have the babysitter for these 3 hours. So I don't have time to like goof off. I'm going to get the work done. Right. And like the capacity of like people of color and mothers and fathers to be creative during the pandemic, to go, oh, we always operate in spaces that aren't created for us. So look, we can figure out Zoom. Was remarkable. Like, and I know, because I know people at the bigger theaters, that they watched these smaller theaters. And then you look at like Dr. Tier at, National Black Theater, who did this like in the 60s. So it's not that I get frustrated when people act like it's not a new idea. Like we've had that conversation, Rachel, like it's not new. Yes. People have been doing it forever. Their voices just haven't been amplified. And when they do it, they have lots of other ideas and they can often do it faster and cheaper. And realistically, we're not getting the best product when we have people for 12 hours at the theater. There's a lot of other extra that can get eliminated, right? And so I think that's important to bring up. And I also think it's important to name that like, these are all marks of like supremacy culture. So if we can get rid of that, there are other ways of working and there are ways of working in joy.
I would love to add just yes. Piggyback on that idea, because I think that's something that that idea of like 10 out of 12, that like we have to work in this concentrated way for 10 hours and then some is so antithetical to our experience as parents. And I think there's something, oh, hi, you're adorable. I think there's something really, really valuable that you learn when you become a parent about how much time you need to do something. And there's something very precious about this swath of time that we give ourselves, where it actually, I think it is, I am more productive as a parent than I ever was before I was a parent. I had time that just sort of disappeared from me. I don't know where it went when I wasn't a parent. And now, as we were just saying, that I'll have 3 hours. I have a nap, and I will get a whole lyric done. Like I'll get something massive done that I could never have done when I was 25 and just like futzing around. And I think that the way that if we look at our 10 out of 12s, we look at those periods of time in a different way, and in a way that is not quite so, that is not luxurious on that day. I think we can be more efficient on those days, and then we can plan better, which is what we have to do as parents. And so I think that the part of what's so interesting about all of this is that I feel like we've learned something as parents, and we're saying, hey, we can help. Um, we can make this better for everyone. This is actually not even just for us. It's just that we can see it better because we've already had to make some of these pivots. We've had to make some of these decisions about how we split our time. I'm like, I can do this during a nap. It's possible. And I will make it happen. But like, I think that it's so easy I think it's so much easier for us to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Kaya, we've talked about this, and there have been so many conversations where how long have caregivers been asking for remote work opportunities? How long have caregivers been saying this rehearsal schedule is not compatible with my life and what I've needed to do? If you're listening to this call, you can tell like these folks all just met and we're all bouncing off of each other. Like we've been talking about this for ages. And the truth is because we have, just like Kaya said, it's just that the voices who needed this support for a very long time, and this includes the disability community, that there's a panel coming up about that with number 10 out of 12s, et cetera. They just haven't been the center of the conversation. And that is the white supremacy culture that you were referencing, Kaya, 100%. We also have Christy back. Christy, I just want to let you know, you can jump in at any time because we didn't get to hear the rest of your share, and it's so important to us. So just a big yes and to this. And with that, I want to throw the ball to Catherine Nelson, because you are also no stranger to the 5-day rehearsal week and 10 out of 12s working at Detroit Public Theater. You're also not a caregiver necessarily. So, to Kate's point of saying, we're caregivers, we're advocating this because this is about our survival, but we promise you it's not us taking something from you. We're giving you a gift. We are advocating for something that will make your space healthier. And in terms of, for someone who's not a caregiver, what sort of transformation have you seen in the space? What sort of support have you been able to create on a professional level at Detroit Public Theater?
Yeah, so I've found that the impact and the offerings are really kind of incredible. And just as a matter of practice at Detroit Public, kind of background info, we tend to rehearse on a 5-day-a-week schedule, and then we tech with 8 out of 10s instead of 10 out of 12s. And we've been doing that for a number of years now. And this actually builds really well off of what Kate and Kaya were just saying. From thinking about just the morale of everyone in the space, our lives outside of the room really inform our work inside of it. Time spent with family, feeding your soul in some way, just having enough time so you don't have to scramble constantly. I mean, even just having time for both eating and sleeping instead of having to choose between them, all of that contributes to our being fuller human beings and gives us actually like the mental energy to show up as our complete selves. And that really ties directly into increased productivity. When people can focus, like we do better work. I heard it once and it really stuck with me that multitasking is really just doing multiple things poorly. And it really resonated with me because I have been so guilty of that myself in the past. And when we expect people to, make their work every waking moment, we are forcing them to multitask. We're forcing them to do everything, including the work, less well. And so when the systems in place flip that and allow for humanity outside of our work, it actually lets us focus on our work better. So often with thinking about work using a 5-day work week or taking a couple hours away from a 10 out of 12, producers think of it as taking something away. They're worried that they're settling for less time. And that is not the case at all. It's really, really about reframing it, because it's such an intentional acknowledgement of what the way that we can give people the tools to do their best work, to show up as their fullest selves, and then making that possible. And I think that's everyone's goal from the beginning. Like that's the producer's goal. They hired us to do our best work. And so things that make that more possible are a win-win situation for everyone. And that's, for caregivers, that's for literally every single person in the room. Just that message that your humanity outside the room contributes to what you're doing inside of it. It's valuable. And it contributes to a culture I found of solidarity and support. I've heard so often this individual mandate in theater to just just solve whatever is happening. I think especially as a stage manager, it's just make it work, fix it, instead of and without thinking at all about the ramifications on yourself or on any other person as a human being. And flipping that and having people ask, what do you need? How can we support you? That you really have to do when you are looking at this focused, intentional amount of time can really open us up to collaborate in unexpected ways sometimes. And that can be really beautiful. And it also contributes to the art. Like all of this makes the art better.
Thank you. A huge yes and to that. And, there was even something added in the chat, like this quote, deal with it, right? This idea that it's like, these are the demands and you are the collateral damage, as opposed to there is nothing we can sacrifice on the show end. What that does for the work culture is it tells us, even actors, I speak as an actor who gets stuck in the middle of the stage and is asked to really just hold my place. And that's exhausting enough, but I see the labor that goes on around me. And I'm still also fully aware of the fact that if I can't deliver, I'm the replaceable one. Like the show stays. And so what it does in the work culture is it shows me how little value I hold in the space. You're also bringing up a conversation, and we're going to jump to Garlia in a second here, but I would love for all of us to contribute. The phrase that comes up for me all the time as a caregiver especially is the phrase, but at what cost? And that's physical, that's mental, that's emotional. It's also financial. So we're going to have Garlia. I'm going to ask you, because we've had this conversation for a little bit, and I'll share a little bit of my numbers. But you're at the public. I believe you're not doing 10 out of 12s anymore. Is that right? Or not doing 10 out of 12s for the next show? What do you anticipate that doing for you as a producer and as a single mom? Like, what parts of your life does that affect?
Also, just to say, I love being on this panel, and also, when you speak about white men who advocated for people, I think, just one of my first mentors in kind of how I got to be doing what I was doing was David Grindle. And so just, who's a person who gave me space at 18 or 19, said, okay, you can use this part of the theater. Yeah, you can use this. I sat in his office for hours just talking about what I was going to do with my life and what I wanted to be when I grew up. Well, I guess David, I grew up a little bit. And so I can't be involved with the USITT and not make that tie, because David is a huge part of just my experience as a young Black artist, but in at a predominantly white school and a predominantly white theater department. I applied to be an ASM, and he was like, okay, I started off in stage management, and he knows that, and then I moved somewhere else, right? So that's just that out of the way. But in terms of the shift that the public is doing, I think for me, just thinking about the text that I was involved in when I first started there, and I also I began at the public. My kids were all ready, who earlier saw me walking around getting one snacks, another one food. Nobody cares that I'm doing anything like this. And so they were already 6 and 8, I think, or 5 and 7 when I started there. So I'd already been through being a freelance artist, right? And so taking anything, like just doing whatever, working any hours. I'm a photographer. I photographed a lot at the National Black Theater, Dr. Barbara Antier National Black Theater. So NBT is a home for me. I've been building homes for Black artists for forever. So like I was just doing anything, right? So when it was time to work at the public, it was like, wow, this is awesome. Also, it's such a big place. Of course I'll do anything. I want you guys to know who I am. Like I've been home with my kids for all this time. I would tell my supervisor all the time. I was like, there's like being home with your kids all the time and then talking to the adults was like, oh, we can have a conversation. You can actually understand me. I don't have to like shout or yell, or we could just like calmly exchange ideas. Wow, that's really cool. I forgot about that. And so, I remember like my first tech experience there though, and that whole the whole idea that like the a cab, you can like when you can take a car home and all of this stuff, but all of those rules are built around being a theater for a very, very, very long time, and it's part of the norm. Everybody does it, and I think you just kind of go with the flow, right? So I think for me, the shift that's happening now, since we're moving away from 10 out of 12s and more towards 8 out of 10s, is that we now, there's the text schedule just becomes a little bit longer, and so I think these conversations that Christy and Katie were just having about more time together, I think is a really great way to talk about it. Is like really what we need is more time to build and really work on the process, so that when we get into those tech situations, the designers can really do their work, and it is about that process, because we do all kind of rush to get everything done all the time, and we're the ones who created, like, we didn't create that system, but we can stop and change it and say, no, this doesn't work for me anymore. And I think something about the pandemic is like, we all know now we can work from home. It's fully possible. So no one can ever say, oh, that's not going to work, I need you here at this meeting. No, you can actually have me on Zoom or whatever your thing is that you would like to use, and that will work out just fine. We don't need to squish 5,000 people into a conference room anymore. Like we don't have to. And so, but I feel like people now understand that we don't need to repeat ourselves. It's very clear. So it's like, what do we do after that? So I think for me, to answer your question after my long tangent, is that how that will affect me is that I won't have to take a train home late anymore. I have a car, so I won't have to take a train home late anymore. Well, hopefully, right? You won't have to drive home super late. You can drive home at more reasonable hours. Won't have to not see my kids at late. I mean, I remember during a number of my shows now at the public with our big schedule. And I think everybody just in general, like the schedules, this is what it was. I wasn't seeing my kids like at all. Like I would be at work late for something, right? And then come home, and then because I live in the suburbs, it's like I take the train. That's a long time. So like a train takes a long time, and a car is really expensive. They're both challenging for both, like, for on a whole scale. So now I'm just looking forward to how we figure all this out, but it's also about thinking who needs to be in the space. I think we're all talking about like the most essential people in the space for production meetings too. Those don't need to be in per person. We can, there's so many things that we have learned from this time. So I'm looking forward to not having a huge expense on anyone's line for car fare. I think transportation is always been a big thing for me, whether that's supported or not, it doesn't have to be, right? We can use that budget line to cover childcare, right? Like take the transportation line out. If you don't have to be there, and put it towards something else, like maybe an actor or a stage manager or somebody has a child care need. So how can you support? So anyway, that's
no, absolutely, and I love that in terms of introducing this financial conversation. And yes, thank you to Amanda for joining us. We're gonna send you out with a wave and with gratitude. And we'll be revisiting your comments for those of you who want to watch the playback. And thank you, Garlia, for introducing this idea of the financial benefits, which we're going to dive into next, in terms of this can really help the theater sustain the show if it's not burning out its people or its budget simultaneously. And I'm going to throw the ball back to Christy, because I think we have her again. And yeah, Christy, I'd love for you to speak to the space where we are right now.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm out in the middle of nowhere talking about trying to do all the things. I'm taking my kids horseback riding in a little bit. So, but I wanted to say, in response to Garlia and a little bit of what Kate said, having the time to draw out with design, and as a designer, like, it makes so much of the difference. I just finished up a show with Opera Orlando, and I was invited back to be a part of the piano workshop. And in the piano workshop, I spoke with our librettist, and he said, and it was Mark Campbell, and he said, I feel like costume designers need to be here even more than I do, because they get the sense of everything that's going on, and you start to have that process, and then it can only be enhanced. So it's not our second draft that's on stage. It's like our 15th draft, which is the one that we all try to get to make it look so beautiful. And so I just wanted to reiterate, like, having that time on the front end of it is really so important. Having those conversations, fleshing out details is so important. And I feel like it makes everything so much more beautiful, as opposed to squishing things into 3 weeks or a month or 6 weeks. And yeah, I think it just would help a lot.
100%. Again, speaking from an actor perspective, those experiences of, like, whenever a costume piece is brought into the rehearsal room, I have always thought, I wish this were more a part of rehearsal, because then tech happens and suddenly, like, the costumes and the set and the tactile and visual information. I think part of the stress of tech is that we're all trying to process it in 4 days of like that sensory overload of, this is our world, how previews go. And when actually, if there were more time to introduce this, and like Christy, like you're talking about, get to that 14th draft. So 15 is when tech begins, not when tech ends. How much more cohesive our creative processes could be. Kate, yeah.
I would love to jump in on this, because I think it's so important and so helpful. There's this crazy thing that happens when you're doing a show, where on the first day they're like, first day of school, and everyone shows up, and these designers show up, and as the writer, there's a lot of people I've never met in the room, and the crazy thing is that I'd never see those people again for the most part until tech. And I think it's such an important thing to say that, like, we have the ability to have, like, if we were able to have those conversations and be talking about all this stuff throughout the entire process, then you wouldn't end up in the situation that you're talking about during tech, where the joke among writers, at least in conversations that I've had, is that you lose the show during tech. And it's not because anybody's trying to lose the show, but you get to the end of the rehearsal process and you're like, great, we all know we're doing. And then tech becomes this wild chase after everything that you didn't do during rehearsal. And then it takes until, the third or fourth preview to get back to what you were doing in the rehearsal room. And if there was a way to integrate some of that and to integrate parts of it that don't have to happen during tech week. I understand that there are times when, like, you have to fix the lights, you have to do certain things that week. But if there was a way to make the parts of it that don't have to be that much about the space, if there was a way to start to build that into the whole process and make it a little bit more holistic, I think it would create a sense for everybody of that there are more people involved, and it would, that idea that the actors feel like they're in the center of it. They wouldn't feel like they're in the center of it. They'd feel more supported and more connected to the entire process that's happening around them.
Absolutely. And in terms of jumping back to, like, we know that there are times when, like Jill is sharing, when you don't own your space, right? And so there are those obstacles. But yeah, there's more lighting, audio, et cetera, that can be done during prep than commonly is. Yeah, absolutely. What we're asking folks to do is to engage with the conversation of what possibility can be. And here's why. Because as caregivers, whether it's elder care or child care, it's already costing too much. Like, I would love to see a show of hands for anyone who's turned down work because you couldn't afford the child care or elder care. And Christy showing up. Here's the thing. We're losing artists. So in my opinion, it's really not about, should we get rid of the 10 out of 12s? Just to be completely transparent about my bias. Should we get rid of the 10 out of 12? Should we do a 5-day rehearsal week? Is that, no, we should. This conversation now is about, like, what are our options and what are our benefits going to be? As an actor, I can pay upwards of $260 a day minimum on childcare during tech week for 10 out of 12s. You reduce that number, or you take my $150 to $200 a day for rehearsal, and you make it 5 days, you're adding that to my paycheck without having to bump up your budgetary line. These are the sorts of benefits that we start to see when it's actually not going to cost us more. It's going to be about spending smarter. And then it's going to cost jump in, Kai. It's going to cost us as the human resource in more efficient ways that are more sustainable. And Tamani, after Kai, I'd love for you to jump in with also the impact of the dollar on women of color, mothers of color, et cetera, when we're talking about finances and cost and pay. But Kaya, yes, please.
Just really quickly, like, also when we're talking about access to amazing humans, right? So I'm thinking about Moxie doing Hickory Dickory, and their costume designer also does sets, JBG, and she designed this set that beat out the Globe, the La Jolla Playhouse, for $500 because Moxie was a supportive environment where not only, like, and when we talk about, like, holistic supporting, there were dads on earlier. There were times where Jen and Delicia knew that an actor or a lighting designer was a new father. And so that new mother wouldn't be burdened who was at home, they had the father bring the baby to the theater, right? So it's like a cultural shift. But because of that, they were able to find someone who could design an award. I mean, and this set was incredible, an award-winning set, and do costumes with a $500 budget. Like, so what we're talking about really is cost savings, because you get people who know how to do all of this amazing work that other theaters are overlooking, just like they've overlooked Black artists and Latinx artists and Indigenous, and because it's not a familiar way of doing things. But the value that Moxie or other theaters that had children like NBT get out of making it a family environment. Or I even think about Freedom at the Old Globe, like when they do their outreach work, making it family centered, because again, lots of cultures center family. It is not a you leave the children at home. I mean, my son walked into a pretty well-known repertory theater in San Diego and was like, oh, this isn't a real theater, like huge theater. This isn't a real theater. And they said, why? And he said, real theaters have toys behind the box office. and they got toys, and there are a lot of parents employed at that theater now, and people got pregnant, right? Like, so, I mean, even in grad school, I got pregnant in grad school, and like nobody had finished before me. After that, there were 4 more babies, right? And so it's a matter of saying, who's going to do it? How do we do it? And it is impactful in places like the public do this, because then other people can look and go, oh, they're doing it here. But I'd really encourage people, and especially schools, like, if you're looking at, well, how do we compete with the top tier? Well, the top tier schools are really changing their culture fundamentally, right? And so it's a matter of, there's no like theater god going, we have to do it this way, right? Like, there's lots of people who do things lots of different ways. Everybody changed on a dime with Zoom. When people found out they'd be persecuted for sexual assault and harassment, we got intimacy coordinators, right? Like, we changed our culture. It is totally doable. There's not the impulse to do it because people have gotten away with it for so long. And it has to be something where we say a parent's place is in the theater, right? Like, we belong here. We have stories to tell. And there are parents who want to cut, like, there's a whole audience. If you start making theaters more family inclusive, if you start thinking more creatively, there's whole audiences that aren't just this, you know, we keep hearing about the graying audience. Well, there's a lot of younger audiences with family caretaking responsibilities. So how can we think, like, for people who are supposed to be creative, it drives me nuts when theater's like, well, we just don't know how to do this differently, right? Like, it's not that hard to come up with solutions.
Yeah, and the connection that I'm hearing is when we create caregiver support, I think part of what terrifies theaters, especially before the pandemic, is because they knew that to create caregiver support would highlight the other pain points in the organization. That's the thing, is that they're like, but if we let there be a lactation space, we need to talk about space accessibility. And that sounds expensive. If we're gonna talk about costs of childcare per hour, we have to talk about cost per hour for artists. And 10 out of 12 is really 16 out of 18. And that costs a lot when we're actually telling the truth about these numbers. So now what the demand is saying, like, these are absolutely interconnected, like you're talking about, Kaya, to say, if you're an organization where you're like, well, we don't see where the solutions are possible, we're not saying, okay, then you're off the hook. We're saying, then you don't have the right people engaged in your organization. So many institutions are like, okay, how are we gonna, diversify our folks and make a better culture, like we'll have a better culture that way. It's like, no, actually, it's like when you share the power, when you listen to those access needs, when you say, you know what, maybe we make it a more equitable structure by doing a 5-day rehearsal week and getting rid of 10 out of 12s, then it's like, oh, now these folks are going to present themselves to you because you've made the space safer. You've made this space healthier. You've made this space more accommodating for caregivers. And now caregivers can bring their contributions, like you were talking about, kind of those creative contributions, to you. But until you're willing to make that safe space, you don't get access to caregivers. You don't get access to folks who are going to create. Thank you so much, Holly, for being here. I would just love to encourage everyone, if you're listening to this conversation, could you share it on another platform? I'd love for you to share the link, send it to someone who might need this support, who might need to see like a baby on screen on a panel, who might need to be hearing this good news. Someone who is concerned about the 10 out of 12. Yes, what's up, baby cheeks? I would love for you to share it. And we're going to be jumping to some questions in the comments. So feel free to start dropping your questions in the comments as well. And Tamanya, I would love to shift to you in terms of the impact on extensive hours on mothers of color and what that means for the financial costs, not to mention like the impact on health. We've had this conversation before. What is your insight that you wish people would understand? You wish people would contend with more?
Sure. Thank you for that. And I just want to say I'm sitting here being so incredibly inspired by every single thing that's going on in this. So thank you all, fellow panelists and commenters. So yes, it's an incredible question. And I mean, to start, I just pulled up the numbers for the end of 2020. Latinas make 55 cents to the dollar for white men, 55 cents. So we already start with half of what most of the white men running theaters come with. Often too, because women generally have a bias about leadership, we're not in leadership positions because when we exhibit leadership, qualities, we are seen as aggressive or divisive or all of these other things. So also we're not seeing ourselves represented in leadership. So that's to start. But also, and I'm a member of the sandwich generation, so I was caregiving with my mother for my sick father last year, and also for a little one, a preschooler. I was on this. My father, just to be transparent, had a brain aneurysm and ended up in the hospital. And Latinx people, just like many other BIPOC individuals, we have subpar healthcare. So we were on the phone, my mother and I, for 4 to 6 hours a day, trying to get doctors to do things like read CAT scans or, make sure that my father's breathing tube was clear. So, and it wasn't. He got pneumonia a number of times. He got a number of other infections. So the load of caregiving is already so large and incredible, as anyone on this call can attest to, but it becomes almost impossible in some ways if you're a member of the BIPOC community, because it's just so much, there's so much more oppression that exists in these other systems that we literally have to fight every day. So that's one place we're coming from. Also, again, because there isn't a lot of representation in leadership, so often we're fighting for our humanity. We're just trying to explain that, like, yes, caregiving is part of life. Yes, like I remember in college, I had a white male professor who was a great guy who used to bring his preschool son in all the time, and he would play ball with us, and he would crawl all over him during class. And the one time I had a woman professor do it, and I cannot say this is why she was fired. There are other things. She didn't work there the next year. And again, there were many other reasons. I'm sure that she was a strong, amazing Black woman. Her name was Dr. Jones, and she was incredible, and she taught me some incredible lessons about life. But I can tell you, there was an inequity. So we know that, and we see that, and we know that there's a bias towards fathers and against mothers in bringing children into the workplace. We are seen as less professional when we do it. We are seen as less organized, and men are seen as incredible dads making space for their family. So there are all of these burdens that we have to contend with just to make it to work, just to come to work. That when we try to expand that space to include us and to include our entire humanity, and again, as a member of the sandwich generation, caring for an elder person and for a small person, sometimes that weight is so great that we just decide not to have that fight, because again, fear of losing our job, fear of losing our position, fear of being replaceable. And I can tell you, in the spaces where I have, with the support of PAL, with the support of incredible theater companies like Simpatico Theater Company, which is a company I did Cried Out with, which won a grant from PAL, and we had a lot of really humane scheduling. In those spaces where we have been able to make inroads and get, leadership to listen, it has literally changed the entire culture of the organization. I have had a number of people come up to me on productions where we had either a 3-day tech, which was 6 hours here, 6 hours here, 6 hours here, or some other schedule. People with disabilities come up and say, I've been in the ER the last 2 productions because of 10 out of 12s. Like, I didn't feel like I could speak up, but because you made space for yourself as a caregiver and the other parents, you were also making space for me. And so we're making space for communities that often don't think that their needs are going to be met. And it's so funny. I was thinking of a story. I have a friend who's a realtor, and I remember he was talking one day, and he was talking about how he always puts a mirror in a house. And I was like, I don't know why that makes a difference. He's like, because you want the people to see themselves in the mirror and imagine themselves in the house. And I remember for the production of Cry It Out we did with Simpatico, that had caregiving on site for actors and designers and everyone. One day we had to use the lobby when we were in tech. We had been at a rehearsal space, but we were in tech, and people kept wandering in and saying, like, why are these babies in the lobby? Like, what are the babies doing in this lobby? And, I remember we always had someone there. They weren't by themselves. It was a professional caregiver. But we would say, oh, we're doing this production about this play about motherhood. And, we would love, we're trying to make it a humane schedule for the mothers and fathers that are here. And I remember we not only had caregiving for a couple of performances. We could bring your child and drop them off. But we also had a few nursing mothers bring their babies and sit in the audience. And I was lucky enough to be there. And I was like, I'm so excited you're here. And I love, as we always say on our PAL calls, the sounds of life. Let them gurgle, let them giggle. If you need my help, I'm right behind you. I'm happy to take them. And I've seen the show a lot. Like, I'm happy to take them and, help you cuddle them outside and find a safe, quiet space if you need a nurse. And again, because people could see themselves in a theater see their kids in a theater in a way they never had before, in a way they had never even imagined before. Suddenly we were like a magnet to people that wanted to experience theater. And many of them were people of color who were like, I never even thought of coming to this theater. It never even like occurred to me. And then when I saw the babies in the lobby, I thought, oh, wow, like this is a space where I can exist with my baby, with my little one. So I think there's so much to be said about that. It trickles all the way down to an audience, and other designers will see that, and other actors will see that. And knowing that that has been forged and that you are working in a humane way that includes families, they don't even have to ask that question. Like, they're going to engage with you differently because you have created a space of trust and safety and humanity and equity. Because again, we as people of color often have a larger caregiving load because of all of these extra species of oppression that we face. So by making that safer and more humane, we are literally inviting people in that could never imagine themselves in there before.
Yes, Anne. Yes, huge thank you. Part of this humanity, I hope for everyone listening, is that when we say no more 10 out of 12s, really what we're saying is you're missing out on people, you're missing out on caregivers, you're missing out on diversifying your audiences, and you're missing out on creating better art. And because so much of that is wrapped up with the schedules that we keep, not only determine who's able to join our companies, they also determine the product of what we put out there. Everyone on this call, just to remind us of the takeaways, has turned down work because we can't afford it. Everyone on this call, I know in our personal conversations, has gotten sick when our children get sick and we have to step away. So I also want to start to say that we have about 15 minutes left. So if you have any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat, whatever platform you're on. We'll be able to see them. But what I would love to offer is that when we did the Radical Parent Inclusion Project at the Playwrights Realm off Broadway, our goal was to say, like, how can we better support caregivers? And one of the ways was the 5-day rehearsal week. And so Pal put together a handbook chapter, and if the USIT team could share that, on how to create the 5-day rehearsal week. This is something that's already provided by Equity. You don't have to wait for this movement to come to fruition to use it. So I'm just offering this resource to anyone who's listening. The 5-day rehearsal week exists. Catherine has used it. I've used it. Amanda has used it. And it's Equity approved. What we found, though, is that when we were listening to the needs of caregivers, like you've all heard on this call, and we did something as radical as say, like, okay, we're only rehearsing 5 days a week, the feedback from the non-caregivers was extraordinary. What they said was, wow, I didn't realize how much I needed this support. This has been better for my work-life balance. And what was so exciting for us was that we learned that when you listen to the needs of groups outside your own, you start to realize the care and support that perhaps you needed but didn't know how to articulate because it wasn't necessarily part of your survival. So I would encourage everyone again to share this video. Share the needs of caregivers and say, how can we start to hear how to create access needs, and how can we start to hear how to create access needs that will make it better and healthier for everyone. If we could share the link for no more 10 out of 12s.com again, right there is where you're going to find the opportunity to submit the survey. You've heard so many stories today. This is a collective that is gathering the stories of, like, what happens with inhumane scheduling, what happens with that impact. We want to hear from you. We're sharing some testimonials. There's also a petition that you can sign. You can share this website on your social media as well to help others realize that there's a movement out there that wants to fight for their health and wellness as well. And Christy, I would love to hear a little bit from you as well, in terms of what takeaway have you heard from your fellow panelists here as well that stands out to you?
I'm just so, my heart is just so full of all the creativity, all of the bad $$ mothers that are out there doing all the things. I feel empowered, like, to stand up for myself and to further do the introspective work of saying, okay, Christy, you need to not kill yourself for this, and then also letting people know that I work with my limitations, because I do get into that place where I'm just like, oh, I need to do this, and this is going to be great, you know. But you know what else is great? Making it to 86 years, making it to 92 years of life, you know, seeing my grandchildren and my great grandchildren. That's also great. And I think as we produce theater, we need to keep in mind that end goal.
I love that. The art is better when the people who make it are better, right? Like I think that that's like one of the best takeaways that we can provide. And I'd love to also offer that, like Christy said, if you are in an organization and you don't feel like you're able to speak up, see if you can engage with the No More 10 out of 12s.com website. There are also resources on productivity, you know, how to frame an argument about, as our caregivers were stating, that we work better when we have time constraints. We work better when we have a limitation on how many days a week we're able to push ahead and forge ahead. There are also not just the data from the hours of productivity, but also the testimonials from organizations who have already put this into practice. So again, this conversation is not necessarily, is it possible, but that it is possible. And how can we listen to our different communities who are impacted by it better, including the caregiver community, in order to make it standard? Like, I would love to see this become common practice. I would love to not turn down 95% of auditions and then only end up with $9 in my bank account during Tech Week while working full-time doing a show. Like, I would love to start telling the truth about what I need. I'd love to invite all of you to start typing in the chat who are watching. What would you love to see out of, you know, 10 out of 12s being abolished, out of people being prioritized, and out of the 5-day rehearsal week coming to fruition? And I encourage any of my panelists, what would you like to manifest for yourself as an artist in this process with that better schedule? Kate, go.
I would love to say that, building off of what Christy was saying, that, and I don't think I'd ever thought about this before, but like, it's really hard when you want to look, it's a combination of wanting to look strong, and then also wanting to look like you're working hard enough, and making sure that everyone knows that you're pulling your weight and all of that. And it's really easy to think that if you're saying, hey, I don't want to do 10 out of 12s, I don't think that that's reasonable to look like you're weak, or to look like you're slacking in some way. And I think what I took away from that, the things that we're saying today, is that actually what you're doing is you're advocating not just for yourself, you're actually advocating for a lot of people, and you're realizing that actually you're probably not alone, but you're the one who's willing to say it out loud. And I think that it's possible to, for myself, to try to reframe the way that I'm thinking about it, as opposed to like, I'm slacking, as no, I'm being brave. I'm saying I'm saying the thing that hasn't been said in the room. And I think that that's an important thing to remember as we're trying to make those changes, that it might even look like to someone that we're slacking, but that actually in the long term, we're saying something that to try to advocate for ourselves, but also for the other people in the room who may not have thought about it as deeply as we are thinking about it.
100%. Advocating for our own boundaries makes our community better. 1000%. Also, just want to contribute what we're finding for the comments. Thank you much for sharing. Someone mentioned, I'd love to welcome back to theater those colleagues who quit because they wanted to have children but had been told it was an either or choice. This is where it gets me. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, I would love to see that too when we return. Another person shared, I can't get back the hours from, I can't get the hours back from my long hours when my kids were small. I want to advocate for people coming into the field so they don't have those regrets. And I appreciate, you all being patient with me kind of working through that. But thank you, Jill, for sharing that. What we also find, I think, when we take this moment to reflect in the pandemics, that we realize we're like, oh, when I said I was willing to sacrifice so much for my art, I didn't realize that would mean relationships. I didn't realize that would mean my children. I didn't realize that would mean my health. Holly shares, I would like companies to take into consideration their interns' well-being as well. We don't want to drive away future talent because they are working themselves to death, even being disciplined or fired because of sickness. That's huge. That's so tired. Yeah, Kaya, yes.
Yeah, I think all of this is like who's in charge, right? Mm-hmm. So when we have different systems, we're starting to see some changes in artistic leadership. The boards need to change too. But like when you have people in charge who are aware, who are caregivers, who are aware of how to take care of, how to give care, how to, and to understand that that can make them better artists. But I advocate for my students in a different way, because for me, it's not about tenure. It's about, I need to see my culture survive. How do I train people who know how to love and to move in the world in this way? And how can I, because people cultivate what is familiar. And so if we have people who can, and it doesn't mean you have to be a parent to do this, but there has to be space for parents. There has to be space for people who care for their older relatives. There has to be space and when those people are in charge, I said this in our private chat, but when you center the most vulnerable, right? When those voices are running things, they're going to be there for all of the people, right? There's never like that civil rights movement went out into many different movements, right? Like it has ripple effects. And so I think that the key to this is who is in leadership, because it's not just like we hire this grant-funded add-on position to do 13 hours of work every 2 weeks on parenting. Like it has to be people who understand this as a core value.
Absolutely. I mean, I just want to shout out, for example, Moxie Theater Company, Detroit Public Theater with 4 mothers at the helm. Thank you, yes, to answer that, Kai, because as you mentioned, there have been Black theaters and Black parents who have been making space for this for a long time. So the question is, will folks hear these stories and see a movement like No More 10 out of 12s and not say, we don't think that's possible, but say, that's what's necessary. Let's talk about what can be possible. And David, welcome back.
Thank you so much. We just have a few minutes left to wrap things up.
Wonderful. We have some shares in the chat. Colette says, I want to see younger women have role models who are mothers and not have to think that family isn't an option in this industry. Totally. I think that's what happens when more humane schedules happen, is that we get intergenerational mentorship because you don't fatigue out. Yes, I don't have kids, but I do have empathy. Thank you, Shannon. Absolutely. And Holly shares, the biggest thing I'm advocating for in graduate school, change the atmosphere of leadership. 100%. Again, the website is nomore10out12s.com. If you would like to get involved, if you would like to advocate, please share that website on social media. Encourage your colleagues to sign the petition. Engage in the survey. If you feel like you don't have a community that will support you, either reach out to one of these panelists, but also reach out to the No More 10 out of 12's Facebook page. It really is a collective of theater artists who are willing to see this through. And so, PAL's very proud to partner with them, because when we return, we want to see this standard and create shape for folks that way. That's what we have. And I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us. Thank you to Manya, Kate, Kaya, Garlia, Christy, and Amanda for sharing your lives. We also have, I want to see theaters stop framing themselves as their members' family. That feels so manipulative. Yes, you can have a separate family from your theater. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Continue engaging in the comments and sharing this panel. And I just want to thank you, everyone, for listening today. That's what we've got.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us. USITT is in a national demographics survey, trying to get the first bit of data that looks at the design, tech, and management of the entertainment industry to see who we are as a populace. I encourage you to look at our website, usitt.org, where you can click to take that survey if you have not yet. It is open through the end of May, and we would greatly appreciate your participation. If you work full-time, part-time, if you do this as a hobby, if you know people, please share it so that we can get an accurate representation. This is done through a partnership with Data Arts and Southern Methodist University. Also, I'd like to invite everyone who's watching. Tomorrow evening, we continue our community conversations with a panel of wonderful costume design professionals who are all representative of various parts of our BIPOC community, talking about their careers and how they work and what inspires them. And these community conversations really are a great way to get inspired by your colleagues. All of these works at USITT are made possible, the technology and support through the support of our member dollars, and also through the Tanisha Jefferson Fund for Inclusion. This supports USITT's work in equity, diversity, and inclusion across our industry. I'm proud not to choke up as I say this, because it is named in memory of what I feel to be one of the great human beings of the world who left us far too soon. So thank you all. As somebody who was lucky enough to be a stage manager in a very supportive opera company in the 90s when my kids were little, I was lucky, but these are challenges we all are going to have. And if we don't speak up and so that your kids do know that you're supposed to have a toy box in the production office, that makes a real theater. Made me laugh because our kids had toys at the theater, and that's the way it should be. So thank you all so much for participating.